Before we dive into the story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more heart-touching tales. Wishing you a beautiful day now. Sit back and enjoy the story. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse like bullets, each drop exploding into fractured light against the city's neon glow, 40 stories below. Sophia Reeves pressed her palms against the cold glass, watching the streets of downtown Seattle blur into watercolor streaks of red and gold. Her breath fogged the window as she whispered the lie she'd been rehearsing all evening. No one has ever touched me? The words tasted like copper pennies and broken promises. Behind her, she could hear him moving through the shadows of his apartment, soft clink of crystal against crystal, as he poured another drink. Marcus Thorne had been watching her for 3 hours now. Ever since she'd walked into his private fundraising event wearing a dress that cost more than most people's rent and a smile that concealed 15 years of carefully buried trauma, she turned from the window, her emerald silk gown catching the ambient light from the city below. Marcus stood 20 feet away in the marble-floored living room, perfectly still except for the steady rise and fall of his chest. At 34, he possessed the kind of dangerous elegance that made powerful men nervous and smart women cautious. His black hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, and his white dress shirt hung open at the collar, revealing a glimpse of scarred skin that spoke of violence survived. "You're lying," he said quietly, swirling the amber liquid. In his tumbler, his voice carried the faint trace of an accent she couldn't place, something European that had been carefully scrubbed away but still lingered in his consonants. "People don't move the way you move. Don't watch exits the way you watch them, without reason." Sophia's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd spent 6 months getting close to Marcus Thorne, learning his habits, his weaknesses, his security protocols. She knew he slept with a loaded Glock under his pillow and kept 3 different passports in a safe behind the Monet in his bedroom. She knew he'd killed 17 people, though only she and 2 other living souls were aware of that number. What she hadn't expected was for him to see through her so easily. "Maybe I'm just naturally paranoid," she said, moving away from the window with deliberate grace. The marble floor was cold beneath her bare feet. She'd abandoned her heels somewhere near the entrance, claiming they were killing her. In reality, she could run faster without them if things went wrong. Marcus set down his glass and took a step toward her. In the dim lighting, his gray eyes looked almost silver, predatory and intelligent. "Paranoia is learned, not natural. Someone taught you to be afraid." The city lights cast shifting patterns across his face as he moved closer. Sophia could smell his cologne now. Something expensive and understated that probably cost more than she'd made in her first year as an FBI agent. Before everything went wrong, or before she'd been forced to disappear and become someone else entirely. "What makes you think I'm afraid?" she asked, letting a hint of challenge creep into her voice. She needed him to believe she was playing his game willingly. "Because you've been in my apartment for 3 hours, and you haven't once turned your back to the door." Marcus stopped just within arm's reach, close enough that she could see the thin white scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. "Because when I handed you that glass of wine, you waited for me to drink first. And because right now, you're calculating how many steps it would take to reach that knife on the kitchen counter." Sophia's blood turned to ice water. She hadn't looked at the kitchen counter once since arriving, but somehow he'd known she'd cataloged every potential weapon in the room within minutes of walking through his door. Professional habit died hard, even when you were supposed to be dead yourself. "You're paranoid too," she said softly, refusing to back down. Why were both still alive? Something flickered across Marcus's face, too quick to read. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek with fingers that were surprisingly warm. "Who hurt you, Sophia?" The false name felt like a blade between her ribs. She'd been Sophia Reeves for 8 months now, since Agent Sarah Chen had officially died in a warehouse fire in Portland. The woman standing in this penthouse, wearing this dress, telling these lies, was a ghost wrapped in stolen skin. "No one hurt me," she whispered, leaning into his touch despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "I told you, I've never don't. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and she could feel calluses that spoke of weapons handled with expertise. I can see it in your eyes. Someone broke you, and you put yourself back together with steel and sharp edges. It's beautiful and terrifying. Thunder rolled across the city, and lightning illuminated the apartment in stark white. For a moment they were frozen in tableau, predator and prey circling each other in an elaborate dance where neither was certain. Who was hunting whom? What if I told you I wasn't who you think I am? Sophia asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. Marcus smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression she'd ever seen. Am either? We're both liars, Sophia. The question is whether we're lying to each other or to ourselves. She felt the walls closing in, all her careful plans crumbling in the face of his unexpected honesty. This was supposed to be simple. Get close, gather intelligence, disappear before he discovered the truth. She hadn't counted on the way he looked, at her as if he could see straight through to the damaged woman beneath the perfect facade. I should go, she said, taking a step back. Marcus caught her wrist, his grip gentle but unbreakable. Stay? The single word hung between them like a loaded gun. Outside, the storm raged against the glass, and inside, two people who had spent years perfecting the art of deception stood on the edge of something that could destroy them both. Give me one night, Marcus said, his voice rough with something. That might have been desperation. One night without lies, without games, without pretending to be someone we're not. Sophia looked into his eyes and saw her own darkness reflected back. Two broken people recognizing each other across a chasm of secrets and blood. She knew she should run. She knew staying would complicate everything, would make it harder to do what she'd come here to do instead. She stepped closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. And after tonight? Marcus's smile turned predatory again, but there was something vulnerable underneath it, something that made her chest ache with recognition. After tonight, we go back to being strangers who happen to share the same beautiful lie. The thunder crashed overhead, and Sophia made the decision that would change everything. She reached up and touched the scar on his face, feeling the raised skin beneath her fingertips. One night she agreed, sealing both their fates with words that tasted like betrayal and redemption in equal measure. Dawn crept through the penthouse like a guilty secret, casting long shadows across the tangled sheets and scattered clothes that told the story of a night that had shattered every carefully constructed wall between them. Sophia woke first, her body pressed against Marcus's side, his arm around her waist, in a possessive grip that should have terrified her, but instead felt like sanctuary. She studied his face in the pale morning light, memorizing the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the way his dark lashes cast shadows on his skin. In sleep, he looked younger, almost vulnerable, and she could see traces of the man he might have been before violence had carved him into something harder. The scar on his face was more prominent in daylight, a reminder that they were both survivors, of wars that had left invisible wounds. Her phone buzzed against the marble nightstand, jarring her back to reality. The message was from a number she recognized but hadn't seen in months. Handler code. Emergency extraction protocol. Package compromised. Abort mission. Extract immediately. Sophia's blood turned cold as she read the words a second time. Only 3 people knew her current location and assignment. One was dead, killed in a car accident 2 weeks ago, that she now realized had been no accident at all. The second was her handler, Agent David Park, who had helped orchestrate her fake death and new identity. The third was the man currently sleeping beside her, who wasn't supposed to know who she really was. She slipped from the bed with practiced silence. Gathering her clothes from where they'd been discarded across the hardwood floor, her dress was wrinkled beyond repair, but she pulled it on anyway, her mind racing through possibilities. Had Marcus discovered her real identity? Was this all an elaborate trap, leaving without saying goodbye? His voice was rough with sleep, but fully alert. She turned to find him sitting up in bed, the sheet pulled around his waist, watching her with those sharp gray eyes that miss nothing. I have an early meeting, she lied smoothly, reaching for her heels. Last night was unexpected, Marcus rose from the bed with fluid grace, apparently unconcerned with his nudity. He was even more impressive in daylight, all lean muscle and controlled power, but it was the network of scars across his torso that made her breath catch. Bullet wounds, knife cuts, what looked like burns from cigarettes or worse. Someone had tried very hard to break him multiple times. "You said one night without lies," he said quietly, moving toward her. "Are we back to pretending already?" Sophia's phone buzzed again. Another message, this time with coordinates for an emergency safe. House and instructions to burn everything. Her cover was blown, which meant Marcus either knew exactly who she was or someone else had compromised her mission. "I'm not pretending," she said, backing toward the door. "But one night is over." Marcus stopped walking, his expression shifting from sleepy intimacy to something harder, more calculating. Sarah Chen. The name hit her like a physical blow. She froze, her hand halfway to the door handle, every muscle in her body coiled for fight or flight. No one had called her by her real name in 8 months. Officially, Sarah Chen was dead, killed in a warehouse explosion while pursuing a human trafficking ring that had ties to Marcus's organization. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. But her voice betrayed her with the slightest tremor. Marcus reached for a tablet on the dresser, his movements deliberate and controlled. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward her. Security footage played in grainy black and white, showing her entering the warehouse the night she was supposed to have died. But the timestamp was wrong. This footage was from 3 weeks ago, long after her supposed death. "You're very good," Marcus said conversationally. "The plastic surgery was subtle, just enough to change your bone structure without being obvious. New hair color, different makeup techniques. You even learned to walk differently, changed your entire body language. If I hadn't been specifically looking for signs of deception, I might never have figured it out." Sophia's mind raced, calculating distances to exits, weapons, escape routes. The tablet showed more footage, images of her in various disguises over the past 8 months. All time-stamped and cataloged. He'd been watching her long before she'd approached him. "The question is," Marcus continued, setting the tablet aside, "are you here to kill me or arrest me?" The honest answer was both, depending on which way the mission went. But looking at him now, remembering the way he'd touched her last night with surprising gentleness, the way he'd whispered her fake name like a prayer, she found herself hesitating. "Does it matter?" she asked. "It does to me." Marcus moved closer, ignoring her defensive posture, "'cause despite everything, despite knowing you've been lying to me from the moment we met, I meant what I said last night. About seeing the real you underneath all the pretense." "You don't know me," Sophia said, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "I know you take your coffee black with 2 sugars because sweet things remind you of childhood. I know you have a scar on your left shoulder blade from where someone shot you and you still flinch when people approach from behind. I know you cry in your sleep sometimes, and you have nightmares about water because someone tried to drown you once." Each revelation was like a knife between her ribs. She'd never told him any of those things, which meant he'd been studying her. With the same intensity, she'd been studying him, professional or personal, she couldn't tell anymore. "I know you're not here because you want to be," Marcus continued, his voice gentler now. "Someone is pulling your strings, making you dance to their tune. The question is, what happens when the music stops?" Sophia's phone buzzed a 3rd time. This message was different, not from her handler, but from an unknown number, a text made. Her blood run cold. "Agent Chen, your handler is dead. Marcus Thorne killed him 2 hours ago. You're next. Run." The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering to the marble floor. Marcus glanced down at it, then back at her face, reading her expression with uncomfortable accuracy. "Bad news?" he asked mildly. "You killed David," she whispered, the words barely audible. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful. "David Park. Yes, about 2 hours ago. He was trying to set up an extraction point for you, which would have complicated things considerably." The casual admission hit her like a physical blow. She'd worked with David for 3 years. He'd been the one to help her disappear, to create Sophia Reeves from nothing, to give her a chance at redemption after everything had gone wrong in Portland. And Marcus had killed him as casually as swatting a fly. "He was trying to save me," she said, rage and grief warring in her chest. "He was trying to use you," Marcus corrected gently.
There's a difference.
"David Park wasn't your savior, Sarah. He was your handler, and you were his weapon. It's a very effective one, but still just a tool to be discarded when you'd outlived your usefulness." Sophia's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. Everything was crumbling, all the careful lies and constructed identities falling away to reveal the ugly truth underneath. She'd been used, manipulated, played by everyone she'd trusted. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking on the single word. Marcus moved closer, slow and careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Because 3 years ago, Agent Sarah Chen uncovered something she wasn't supposed to find. A network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement, a conspiracy that had been operating for decades. The warehouse explosion wasn't meant to kill you, Sarah. It was meant to silence you permanently." The world tilted sideways, and Sophia found herself gripping the edge of the dresser for support. The trafficking ring she'd been investigating, the explosion that had supposedly killed her, the new identity that had been gifted to her. None of it had been random. "David saved me," she whispered, but the words sounded uncertain, even to her own ears. "David created you," Marcus said quietly. "He took a traumatized agent who'd stumbled onto something dangerous and turned her into the perfect weapon. Someone with no official identity, no support system, no one to miss her if she disappeared. He pointed you at targets and let you believe you were choosing your own path." Sophia looked up at him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a target to be eliminated or a criminal to be arrested, but another player in a game she was only beginning to understand. "And you?" she asked. "What's your role in all this?" Marcus smiled, and it was sad and dangerous and utterly without pretense. "I'm the man who's been hunting the same conspiracy you stumbled into 3 years ago. The man who's been waiting for someone like you to surface, someone with the skills and motivation to help me bring them down. And last night was me falling for the woman underneath all the lies and deceptions, which complicates things considerably." Outside the penthouse windows, Seattle was waking up, the city spreading out below them in all its rain-soaked glory. Somewhere in that maze of streets and shadows, the people who had orchestrated her fake death were realizing their weapon had gone rogue. Soon they would come for both of them. "So what happens now?" Sophia asked. Marcus picked up her phone from where it had fallen, glancing at the screen before handing it back to her. "Now, we run, together, and we figure out who we can. Trust in a world where everyone seems to want us dead." The phone buzzed again in her hand. Another message, this one from a number she didn't recognize, but with words that made her heart stop. "We have your brother, asterisk." The abandoned warehouse district of South Seattle smelled like rust and broken dreams. A perfect metaphor for everything Sarah's life had become in the span of 12 hours. She crouched behind a shipping container, rain soaking through her stolen jacket, watching Marcus through night vision binoculars as he approached the meeting point alone. Against every tactical instinct screaming in her head, she'd agreed to let him go in first. The message about her brother had changed everything. Tommy Chen was supposed to be safe, protected by a new identity, just like hers. Living quietly in Portland under the name Thomas Reed, but the photograph that had followed the text message showed him bound to a chair in what looked like the same type of warehouse where she'd supposedly died 3 years ago. The message had been simple and devastating. Pier 47. Warehouse 12, come alone or he dies. Midnight, that had been 6 hours ago. 6 hours of Marcus systematically dismantling every assumption she'd held about her life, her mission, her supposed death and resurrection. He'd shown her files she'd never seen. Financial records that painted David Park as something far more sinister than a handler trying to save a burned agent. David hadn't been her savior. He'd been her puppet master, and she'd been dancing to his tune for 3 years without ever realizing it. "He's moving to the north entrance." Marcus's voice crackled through the earpiece she wore, barely audible above the rain, drumming against the metal containers around her. 2 men on the catwalks, at least 3 more on the ground floor. Professional. Set up. Sarah adjusted her position, checking the Glock he'd given her for the 3rd time. 17 rounds plus 1 in the chamber. It wouldn't be enough if this went sideways, but it was better than nothing. The knife strapped to her thigh was a comfort, familiar weight that reminded her she'd survived worse odds than this. Any sign? Of Tommy, she whispered into her cum. Negative. But there's too much shadow to be certain. Sarah, if this is a trap, it is a trap, she cut him off. The question is whether it's a trap for me or for both of us. Through her binoculars, she watched Marcus disappear into the warehouse. The man moved like liquid shadow, each step calculated and silent. Whatever his background was, he'd been trained by professionals, military maybe, or something more specialized. She'd seen him kill David Park with nothing but his bare hands, in a length of wire, efficient and emotionless as turning off a light switch. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in months. Her earpiece crackled with static. Then Marcus's voice came through, tight with controlled anger. Sarah, you need to see this. Now. She abandoned her overwatch position, moving through the maze of containers with practiced stealth. The warehouse loomed ahead of her, its broken windows like dead eyes staring into the Seattle night. Every instinct told her to run, to disappear into the urban wilderness and never look back. But Tommy was inside somewhere, and he was the only family she had left. The north entrance was a loading dock, with the metal door rolled halfway up. Sarah slipped underneath, her gun drawn, and found herself in a cavernous space filled with shadows and the echo of dripping water. Industrial lighting cast harsh pools of illumination across concrete floors stained with oil and worse things. Center of the warehouse, Marcus's voice guided her through the darkness. And Sarah, I'm sorry. She found him standing in a circle of harsh fluorescent light, his hands raised in surrender. 3 men in tactical gear kept assault rifles trained on him, while a 4th man in an expensive suit stood behind what looked like a medical examination table. On the table, under a white sheet, was a human-shaped form. Sarah's heart stopped. Agent. Sarah Chen, the man in the suit said, his voice carrying a slight British accent. Or do you prefer Sophia Reeves these days? So many names, so many faces. Must be exhausting keeping track of who you're supposed to be. She kept her gun trained on him as she moved closer, but her eyes were fixed on the shape under the sheet. The proportions were wrong for Tommy. Too tall, too broad. Relief and dread warred in her chest as she realized this was another game, another manipulation. Who is that? She asked, nodding toward the table. Why don't you see for yourself? The man gestured to the sheet with theatrical flourish. Go ahead, Agent Chen. Pull it back. Let's see how well you really knew the man who created you. Hand trembled as she reached for the corner of the sheet. She already knew what she was going to find, but the confirmation still hit her like a physical blow. David Park's lifeless eyes stared up at the warehouse ceiling, his face purple with strangulation marks. Someone had beaten him badly before killing him, judging by the bruises and swelling. David Park, the man in the suit, said conversationally, Your handler, your savior, your betrayer? Did you know he'd been skimming money from your operations? For 3 years? Taking a percentage of every asset you recovered? Every target you eliminated? He made quite a fortune off your particular talents. You're lying, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Too many things were adding up, too many small inconsistencies she'd ignored. Am I check his pocket, Agent Chen? Left breast pocket. Of his jacket. Against her better judgment, Sarah reached into David's jacket. Her fingers found a thick envelope stuffed with cash, more money than a federal agent should have been carrying. Underneath the bills was a photograph that made her blood run cold. The picture showed her entering Marcus's building 3 weeks ago, taken with a telephoto lens from a considerable distance. On the back, in David's handwriting, were the words, Phase 3 complete. Eliminate both targets after intelligence gathering concludes. He was going to kill you, the man in the suit said gently. Both of you, actually. Mr. Thorne here was supposed to be your final assignment, and then you were to be permanently retired. A convenient accident, perhaps a confrontation gone wrong. Two dangerous criminals eliminating each other, leaving the field clear for David's real employers. Sarah looked across the table at Marcus, seeing her own shock and betrayal reflected in his eyes. Everything they'd shared, every moment of connection and trust, had been orchestrated by a dead man who'd seen them both as expendable assets. "Who are you?" she asked the man in the suit. "Someone who knows the value of talented individuals like yourself? Someone who can offer you what David Park never could? The truth." He gestured to one of his men, who tossed a thick file onto the table. "Next to David's body? Your brother is alive, Agent Chen. Safe and sound in Portland, just as you believed. But he won't stay that way if you don't listen to what I have to offer." Sarah's finger tightened on her gun's trigger. "Where is he?" "Somewhere safe, for now. But safety is such a fragile thing, isn't it? Accidents happen, buildings catch fire, cars lose control on mountain roads." The man's smile was polite and absolutely terrifying. "Of course, none of that needs to happen if you're reasonable. What do you want, your skills, Agent Chen? Your particular combination of training, motivation, and flexibility regarding legal niceties. And I want Mr. Thorne alive, which is more consideration than David Park was planning to show him." Marcus spoke for the first time since she'd arrived. "And if we refuse, then your brother dies, Agent Chen. Slowly and painfully. And you'll receive detailed photographs of the process. And Mr. Thorne, well, you've made quite a few enemies in your crusade against my organization. It would be simple enough to provide them with your location." The warehouse fell silent, except for the sound of rain hammering against the metal roof. Sarah stared down at David's corpse, at the photograph that proved how thoroughly she'd been manipulated, and felt something inside her chest crack and bleed. "What's the job?" she asked quietly. The man in the suit smiled, and it was the most frightening expression she'd ever seen. "There's a woman in Vancouver, someone who's been causing my organization considerable difficulty. Her name is Elena Vasquez, and she's been systematically exposing our operations across the Pacific Northwest. I need her eliminated, along with her entire network." "A whistleblower," Marcus said, his voice flat with disgust. "A terrorist who's killed dozens of innocent people with her reckless accusations and leaked intelligence." The man corrected smoothly. "Someone who needs to be stopped before she causes more damage." Sarah felt the weight of the gun in her hand, the familiar comfort of metal and death. She'd killed 16 people in her career as an FBI agent, all of them justified, all of them necessary. This would be different. This would be murder, pure and simple. But Tommy's life hung in the balance, and she'd already lost too much to walk away now. "I'll need complete intelligence files on the targets," she said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Security protocols, daily routines, known associates. Of course, you'll have everything within 24 hours. And I work alone," Sarah continued. "No oversight, no interference." The man glanced at Marcus, then back to her. "I'm afraid Mr. Thorne will be accompanying you. Consider him insurance that you complete the mission as specified." Marcus met her eyes across David's corpse, and she saw her own despair reflected back at her. They were trapped, both of them, caught in a web of manipulation that had been spinning around them for years. And now they were being forced to become the very thing they'd been fighting against. 24 hours to prepare," Sarah said. "Then we go to Vancouver?" As she turned to leave, the man in the suit called after her, "Agent Chen, don't try to run. Complete this assignment, and your brother stays safe. Fail, and you'll both join David Park on that table." Outside in the rain-soaked night, Sarah finally allowed herself to break. She leaned against the warehouse wall and let the tears come, grief and rage and helplessness washing over her in waves that left her gasping. Marcus appeared beside her, his face grim in the streetlight. "We'll find another way," he said quietly. "Will we?" Sarah looked at him, this man who'd become her anchor in a world gone mad. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like we're about to become everything we've been fighting against." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out into the Seattle night. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, and filled with something that might have been regret. "There's something I haven't told you, Sarah. Something about Elena Vasquez, and why they really want her dead." The words hit her like ice water, and she realized that even now, even after everything they'd been through, Marcus was still keeping secrets. The man she'd trusted with her life, her heart, her last shred of hope, was still lying to her. "What haven't you told me?" she whispered. Marcus turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the answer before he spoke the words that would shatter what remained of her world. "Elena Vasquez is my sister." The safe house in Belltown was a study in paranoia and preparation. Every window reinforced with bulletproof glass. Every entrance monitored by cameras that fed to screens Marcus watched with obsessive intensity. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, stripping and cleaning her weapons with mechanical precision, while the weight of his revelation settled in her chest like lead. Elena Vasquez was his sister. The woman she'd been ordered to kill was family to the man who'd become her entire world in the span of a single night. "Her real name is Elena Thorne," Marcus said from his position by the monitors. "She's 2 years younger than me, an investigative journalist who spent the last 5 years exposing human trafficking networks across 3 countries. Everything that man told you was a lie. She's not a terrorist. She's a hero." Sarah looked up from the Glock she'd been methodically reassembling. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "'Cause I thought I could handle it myself. Because I've spent my entire adult life protecting her from the consequences of my choices, and I didn't want to drag you into it." Marcus turned from the screens, his face haggard with exhaustion and something deeper. "Because I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd choose your brother over my sister." The honesty in his voice cut through her anger like a blade. She understood the calculus he'd been running, the impossible mathematics of love and loyalty and survival. In his position, she might have made the same choice. "Tell me about her," Sarah said quietly. Marcus moved to the window, staring out at the Seattle skyline through rain streaked glass. "Elena was 8 when our parents died. Car accident on a mountain road outside Sarajevo. I was 16, old enough to know the accident wasn't random, but not old enough to do anything about it. The people who killed them took everything we had, left us in the care of distant relatives who saw us as burdens." He was quiet for a long moment, lost in memories that carved lines of pain across his face. "I joined the military as soon as I was old enough, special forces, then private contracting. Anything that would pay enough to keep Elena in school, to give her the life our parents would have wanted for her. She never knew about the things I did, the people I killed to keep money flowing to her accounts. But she found out," Sarah guessed. 3 years ago, she was investigating a trafficking ring in Bosnia, following a story about missing women being sold across European borders. She traced the money trail back to some of my former employers and eventually to me. Marcus's reflection in the window looked haunted. "She called me in the middle of the night, crying, asking me if everything she'd believed about her big brother was a lie." Sarah felt her heart break a little for both of them. The weight of family, of choices made in darkness to protect the people you loved from that same darkness. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That everything I'd done was for her, but that didn't make any of it right. She hung up on me and didn't speak to me for 6 months." Marcus turned from the window, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "When she finally called back, she told me she understood why I'd made those choices, but that she couldn't live with blood money anymore. She was going to expose everything, clean slate, no matter what it cost, either of us. And now someone wants her dead for it. The same people who ordered your fake death 3 years ago. The same network David Park was really working for. Lena's investigations have been getting too close to something they want to stay buried." Sarah stood, her weapons clean and ready, her mind turning over tactical possibilities. "Where is she now?" "Vancouver, staying in a hotel under an assumed name. She doesn't know they've found her yet, doesn't know about the contract on her life." Marcus met her eyes across the small kitchen. "Sarah, I know what I'm asking. I know. Choosing Elena means sacrificing your brother, and I'll understand if you can't make that choice." The words hung between them like a loaded weapon. Tommy, the only family she had left, the brother she'd supposedly died to protect, against Elena, a woman she'd never met who shared blood with the man she'd fallen in love with, against every rational thought in her head. There might be another way, Sarah said slowly, an idea forming in the back of her mind. What if we don't have to choose? Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting. They want Alina dead, but they need proof that we completed the mission. What if we give them proof, but not the kind they're expecting? Over the next hour, Sarah outlined her plan. It was insane, dangerous, and required perfect timing and a considerable amount of luck. It also required trusting people they barely knew and making choices that couldn't be unmade. Marcus listened without interruption, its expression growing more troubled with each detail she shared. It could work, he said finally. But if we're wrong about any part of it, everyone dies. Alina, your brother, both of us. Then we'd better not be wrong. They spent the rest of the night preparing, gathering equipment and intelligence, making contact with Alina through encrypted channels. By dawn, they were ready to drive north to Vancouver, armed with a plan that depended entirely on their ability to convince everyone involved that they were still playing by the old rules. The drive to Vancouver took 4 hours through rain that never seemed to stop, as if the Pacific Northwest sky was weeping for all the blood that had been spilled in its shadow. Sarah drove while Marcus coordinated with Alina via encrypted satellite phone. His voice tight with barely controlled emotion as he explained the situation to the sister he'd been trying to protect his entire adult life. She's angry, he said. After ending the call, not at you, at me. For bringing this to her doorstep, for not telling her about you sooner. Can she do her part? Sarah asked, taking the exit for downtown Vancouver. Lena's been living with a target on her back for 3 years. She knows how to disappear when she needs to. Marcus stared out at the city's skyline, glass towers reflecting gray clouds. The question is whether we can sell this performance well enough to fool professionals. They met Marcus Thorne in the lobby of a downtown hotel that catered to business travelers, the kind of anonymous place where no one remembered faces or asked uncomfortable questions. Sarah recognized her immediately, despite never having seen a photograph. She had Marcus's eyes, the same steel gray that missed nothing, and the same way of holding herself that suggested coiled violence beneath a civilized exterior. Alina was smaller than Sarah had expected, maybe 5'4" in her practical boots. With dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and clothes that screamed journalist rather than spy. But her handshake was firm, her gaze direct and assessing. You're the woman my brother fell in love with in a single night, Alina said without preamble. The FBI agent who's supposed to be dead but is somehow walking around Seattle breaking hearts and taking names. Something like that, Sarah replied. And now you're both here to fake my death so I can disappear and you can save your brother's life. Alina looked between them with an expression that suggested she found the entire situation both absurd and inevitable. Marcus always did have a gift for complicated solutions to simple problems. Alina, Marcus started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. I'm not angry about the plan, brother. I'm angry that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth from the beginning. I'm a journalist, Marcus. I investigate things for a living. Did you really think I wouldn't eventually figure out that the mysterious benefactor who'd been funding my work for years was the same man who'd been killing people to keep me safe? The siblings stared at each other across the hotel lobby, years of complicated love and protective lies hanging between them like smoke. Sarah felt like an intruder, witnessing something private and painful. I was trying to protect you, Marcus said quietly, by lying to me, by letting me believe I was succeeding on my own merit when really I was just another. One of your operations? Elena's voice was steady, but Sarah could see the hurt underneath the anger. Do you have any idea what it felt like to discover that my entire career, everything I'd built, was funded by blood money? Alina, no. She held up her hand again. We don't have time for this conversation now, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to have it at all. Let's focus on staying alive long enough to figure out what comes after. They moved to a conference room. Alina had booked under one of her many false identities, spreading maps and surveillance photos across the table like generals planning a siege. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, which made Sarah nervous. Air experience. The simplest. Plans were the most likely to go catastrophically wrong. The exchange is set for midnight tomorrow at the docks, Sarah said. pointing to an area on the map she'd marked with red ink. "They'll expect me to bring proof that you're dead, which means we need to stage a very convincing murder scene." "Then," Elena asked, "then you disappear? New identity, new life, somewhere they'll never think to look for you." Sarah met the other woman's eyes. "It means leaving everything behind. Your work, your reputation, your life as Elena Thorne. I've been prepared for that possibility for 3 years," Elena said simply. "The stories I've been working on are all in the hands of people I trust. The trafficking networks will be exposed whether I'm alive to see it or not." Marcus spoke for the first time since they'd entered the room. "There's something else. Something I haven't told either of you." Sarah felt her stomach drop. After everything they'd been through, he was still keeping secrets. "The man who hired us, the one in the expensive suit who claims he'll kill your brother if we don't complete the mission. His name is Viktor Kozlov, and he's Elena's primary target. The man she's been hunting for 5 years. Elena went very still. Viktor Kozlov is supposed to be dead. Killed in a bombing in Prague 2 years ago, staged just like Sarah's death. He's been operating from the shadows ever since, coordinating trafficking operations across 6 countries. Elena's investigations were getting close enough to expose his entire network, so he decided to eliminate the problem permanently. Sarah looked between the siblings, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. This was never about completing a simple assassination. This is personal for him. "Which means he won't just disappear if we fake Elena's death," Marcus continued. "He'll want to see the body, verify the kill personally, and when he realizes we've been playing him, he'll kill Tommy and come after all of us," Sarah finished. Conference room fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic. They'd walked into a trap more elaborate than any of them had realized, and now they were committed to a course of action that would likely get them all killed. "So we changed the plan," Elena said quietly. "To what?" Sarah asked. Elena smiled, and for the first time, Sarah saw the family resemblance clearly. It was the same dangerous expression Marcus wore when he'd made a decision that would probably get him killed, but might, just might, accomplish something important. "We don't fake my death," Elena said. "We fake his."
Hey!
The plan that emerged over the next 6 hours was audacious, terrifying, and had approximately a dozen ways it could go wrong and get them all killed. But it also had one significant advantage over their previous strategy. If it worked, Viktor Kozlov would be dead, and they'd all be free. If it failed, well, now they'd be too dead to care about the consequences. As Sarah prepared for what would likely be the last night of her life, she found herself thinking about the chain of choices that had led her to this moment. A warehouse explosion that had supposedly killed her, but had really just transformed her into someone else. A chance encounter with a billionaire who'd turned out to be as damaged and dangerous as she was. A brother held hostage by people who trafficked in human misery. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, finding her on the hotel balcony as she watched the sun set over. "Vancouver's harbor?" Sarah considered the question seriously. 24 hours ago, she'd been Sophia Reeves, a carefully constructed identity living a carefully controlled life. Now she was Sarah Chen again, about to risk everything for a chance at justice and freedom. "Just one," she said finally. Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I regret that it took me this long to stop running from who I really am." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool evening air. "And who are you really, Sarah Chen?" She turned to face him, seeing her own reflection in his steel-gray eyes. "Someone who's tired of letting other people write the ending to her story?" Marcus smiled and leaned down to kiss her, with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Then let's go write a better one." Tomorrow, they would walk into Viktor Kozlov's trap knowing it was a trap, armed with a plan that depended on perfect timing and considerable luck. Tomorrow, Sarah would finally face the man who'd orchestrated her fake death and turned her into a weapon. Tomorrow, she would either save her brother and destroy the network that had been pulling her strings for 3 years, or she would die. Trying, but tonight. She had this moment with Marcus on a balcony overlooking a city that didn't know. How much blood would be spilled in its streets before the sun rose again? Tonight, she could pretend that love was stronger than the darkness they were about to walk into. Tomorrow would bring its own reckoning. Asterisk. The Vancouver docks at midnight were a symphony of shadows and steel. Cargo containers stacked like building blocks against a sky that wept cold Pacific rain. Sarah crouched behind a shipping crane, watching Viktor Kozlov's men take their positions around Pier 9 with professional precision. 6 that she could see, probably twice that number she couldn't. The man himself stood beneath a pool of harsh, industrial lighting, checking his expensive watch with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to making others wait. Her earpiece crackled with Marcus's voice from his position on the opposite side of the dock. Target confirmed. Are you ready for this? Sarah touched the detonator in her jacket pocket. Feeling the weight of shaped charges Alina had somehow acquired and positioned throughout the pier's support structure. The journalist had disappeared into the maze of containers an hour ago, supposedly dead, but very much alive and armed with enough explosives to level half the waterfront. As ready as anyone can be for elaborate suicide, Sarah replied softly. The plan was insane. Convince Viktor that Alina was dead, get close enough to verify his identity beyond any doubt, and trigger an explosion that would collapse the entire pier into the harbor while hopefully allowing them to escape in the chaos. Simple on paper, nightmarish in execution. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. A photograph of Tommy, alive but clearly terrified, tied to a chair in what looked like the cargo hold of a ship. It's the message that followed. Made her blood run cold. Pier 9. Now, come alone or watch him die on livestream. Sarah closed her eyes. Hell yeah. Letting herself feel the fear and rage for exactly 3 seconds before pushing it down into the cold. A dark place where she kept everything that could get her killed. Tommy was here, somewhere in this maze of steel and shadow, which meant the plan had just become infinitely more complicated. Change of plans, she whispered into her cum. Tommy's here, on a ship somewhere in the harbor. Marcus's voice came, back tight with controlled anger that changes everything. We can't bring down the pier if your brother's on one of those vessels. I know. Sarah stood, checking her weapons one final time. The Glock rode in a shoulder holster, the knife strapped to her thigh and a backup pistol tucked into her boot. Not nearly enough firepower for what was coming, but it would have to do. Alina, are you in position? Negative, came Elena's voice through the cum, and Sarah felt her heart skip. I've got a problem. 3 men just entered my hiding spot, and they're not here to help. The careful choreography of their plan began to unravel like a cheap sweater. Sarah could hear the sound of a struggle through Elena's cum. Its muffled curses and what sounded like Russian, then silence that stretched like a held breath. Elena's blown, Marcus said unnecessarily. I know. Sarah stepped out from behind the crane, walking toward the pool of light where Viktor waited with the deliberate pace of someone who had accepted that death was probably coming. I'm going in. Sarah, don't. She switched off her cum, cutting off whatever Marcus had been about to say. Some conversations were too dangerous to finish, and some choices had to be made alone. Viktor Kozlov looked exactly like what he was, a predator dressed in expensive clothes. His suit probably cost more than most people made in a year, and his silver hair was perfectly styled despite the rain. But it was his eyes that made Sarah's skin crawl, pale blue and completely without warmth or humanity. Agent Sarah Chen, he said as she approached, his accent carrying traces of Eastern Europe that money and time had failed to completely erase. Or should I call you the woman who is supposed to be dead? You've caused me considerable inconvenience. Where's my brother? Viktor gestured toward the harbor, where dozens of cargo ships rode at anchor in the darkness, safe for the moment. Safety is such a relative concept, don't you think? 2 of his men flanked Sarah as she entered. The circle of light, assault rifles trained on her center mass, professional killers who would put her down without hesitation if their boss gave the word. I completed the contract, Sarah said, pulling a thick envelope from her jacket. Lena Thorne is dead. Viktor opened the envelope, examining the photographs. Inside, with the detached interest of someone reviewing a restaurant menu, the pictures showed a woman who looked remarkably like Alina lying in what appeared to be a hotel room. Blood pooled beneath her head, eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Impressive work, Viktor said finally. Though I have to say, I'm disappointed it was so easy. Alina Thorne had quite the reputation for being difficult to kill. Everyone dies when you put enough bullets in them. True enough. The photographs back into the envelope, though it does raise the question of what to do with you now that you've outlived your usefulness. Sarah had expected this, had known from the moment she'd agreed to the contract that Victor never intended to let her walk away. Men like him didn't leave loose ends, especially loose ends that knew enough to destroy them. My brother goes free. She said that was the deal. Was it? Victor's smile was the most frightening thing Sarah had ever seen. I don't recall making any promises about your brother's ultimate fate. I simply said he would remain safe as long as you completed your mission. The sound of footsteps on wet concrete announced the arrival of more men, these escorting a struggling figure between them. Sarah's heart clenched as she recognized Tommy, despite the bruises and blood that marred his face. Her little brother, who was supposed to be safe in Portland, living a quiet life as Thomas Reed, looked up at her with eyes that held equal parts relief and terror. Sarah. His voice was hoarse, probably from screaming. I'm sorry. They found me at work. I didn't. Tell them anything. I swear it's okay, she said, keeping her voice steady, even though her world was cracking apart. Everything's going to be okay, Victor laughed, the sound echoing off the shipping containers like breaking glass. How touching. Family reunions are always so emotional. He pulled a chrome-plated pistol from his jacket, the metal gleaming in the harsh lighting. I'm curious, Agent Chen. If you had to choose between saving your brother and avenging the people I've killed, which would you pick? Sarah understood with crystalline clarity that this had always been Victor's endgame. Not just killing Alina, or eliminating a problematic FBI agent, but forcing her to make the kind of choice that would destroy her regardless of what she decided. He fed on human suffering the way normal people breathed air. I choose neither, she said quietly. Victor raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry, I said I choose neither. Sarah smiled and felt something cold and deadly settling in her chest. I choose to burn your entire world down and dance in the ashes. She triggered the detonator in her pocket with her thumb, and Pier 9 erupted in fire and thunder. The shaped charges Lena had positioned throughout the pier's support structure detonated in sequence, each explosion perfectly timed to bring down maximum structural damage. The concrete beneath their feet cracked and shifted as steel support beams. Twisted like pretzels under the tremendous force, Sarah dove toward Tommy as the world exploded around them, tackling her brother and rolling them both behind a concrete barrier as chunks of debris rained down like hail. Victor's men were shouting in panic, their professional composure shattered by the sudden transformation of their controlled environment into chaos through the smoke and dust. Sarah saw Victor himself, his expensive suit torn and bloodied, struggling to his feet with murder in his pale eyes. The chrome pistol was still in his hand, and he was looking for targets with the single-minded focus of a predator that had been wounded but not killed. Tommy, stay down, Sarah shouted over the sound of collapsing infrastructure. She drew her Glock and put 3 rounds center mass into the nearest gunman. Watching him crumple to the rain-slicked concrete, the pier was tilting now, one end sinking into the harbor as the explosions took their toll on the support structure. Sarah could hear Marcus shouting her name from somewhere in the smoke, but she couldn't see him, couldn't tell if he was alive or buried under tons of twisted metal. Victor appeared through the dust like a nightmare made flesh, his pistol tracking toward Tommy with deadly precision. Sarah threw herself between them, feeling the bullet intended for her brother punch through her shoulder and spin her around like a child's toy. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but she'd been shot before and knew how to function through it. She brought up her Glock with her offhand and put 2 rounds into Victor's chest, watching with savage satisfaction as the man who'd orchestrated so much suffering staggered backward. But he didn't fall. Body armor. Sarah realized as Victor raised his pistol again. Professional paranoia that might keep him alive long enough to kill them both. The next shot never came. Alina Thorne materialized from the smoke behind Victor like an avenging angel, very much alive and armed with what looked like a salvaged assault rifle. She put a controlled burst into the back of Victor's head, ending the threat with the kind of precision that suggested considerable experience with violence. The piers collapsing, Alina shouted over the sound of groaning metal. "We need to move now." Sarah struggled to her feet, her wounded shoulders screaming in protest. Tommy was beside her immediately, supporting her weight with surprising strength. Her little brother had grown up while she'd been playing dead, developed the kind of quiet competence that reminded her painfully of their father. "Marcus," she gasped, looking around frantically. "Where's Marcus?" Here came his voice from behind them. He emerged from the smoke supporting an injured man Sarah didn't recognize. Probably one of Victor's people who'd been caught in the blast. Even in the middle of a collapsing pier with bullets flying, Marcus was trying to save lives. The four of them made their way toward the edge of the pier as the entire structure groaned and shifted beneath their feet. Steel cables snapped with sounds like gunshots, and somewhere in the darkness Sarah could hear the splash of debris hitting the water. They reached the edge just as the pier gave its final shudder and began its inevitable slide into Vancouver Harbor. Sarah looked down at black water that seemed to stretch forever, then at her brother's face. Pale, but determined in the reflected light of the fires burning behind them. "Can you swim?" she asked Tommy. "Like a fish," he replied with a ghost of his old smile. "Then we jump on 3. One to the pier collapsed completely, taking the decision away from them. Sarah felt herself falling through space, her wounded shoulder on fire, her brother's hands somehow finding hers in the darkness. Below them waited cold Pacific water and the uncertain promise of survival. She hit the surface hard enough to drive all the air from her lungs, the shock of the cold water making every nerve in her body scream and protest. But she was alive, and Tommy was alive. And somewhere in the churning foam she could hear Marcus calling their names. They swam for the shore through debris and smoke. 4 people who had started the evening as strangers and enemies but were ending it as something approaching family. When they finally dragged themselves onto a deserted stretch of beach, half a mile from the collapsed pier, Sarah allowed herself to believe for the first time in 3 years that she might actually be free. Viktor Kozlov was dead, his organization leaderless and exposed. Elena's stories would see print now without fear of retaliation. Tommy was safe, and the people who'd been pulling Sarah's strings for 3 years were buried under tons of concrete and steel at the bottom of Vancouver Harbor. But freedom, Sarah discovered, came with its own kind of terror. Who was she without a handler giving her orders, without a mission to complete, without an identity to maintain? Sarah Chen was supposed to be dead, and Sophia Reeves had never really existed. For the first time in her adult life, she could choose who she wanted to become. Marcus found her sitting on a piece of driftwood 3 hours later, watching the sun rise over the Pacific, while Coast Guard boats searched the wreckage of Pier 9. Her shoulder was bandaged with strips torn from Elena's shirt. And she'd managed to stop shivering, but she still felt like she was drowning. "Regrets?" he asked, settling beside her on the sand. Sarah considered the question seriously. Viktor Kozlov was dead, along with most of his immediate organization. The trafficking networks Alina had been investigating would be exposed and dismantled. Justice, of a sort, had been served, but justice had come at a cost. There were innocent people on those ships in the harbor who'd been caught in the blast. Security guards and dock workers who'd been doing their jobs when the pier came down. Sarah had saved her brother and stopped a monster, but she'd done it by becoming something monstrous herself. "Ask me again in a year," she said finally. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the rescue boats work. "What happens now? Now we disappear. It's new names, new lives. Somewhere they'll never think to look for us." Sarah turned to look at him, this man who'd become her anchor in a world gone mad. "Unless you have somewhere else you'd rather be." "Just been running my entire adult life," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe it's time to try standing still for a while. With you." The words hung between them like a promise, fragile and precious in the morning light. Sarah reached for his hand, feeling calluses that spoke of weapons handled with deadly expertise. Scars that told stories of violence survived and enemies defeated. "I don't know how to be normal," she admitted. "I don't know how to be anything other than what they made me. Then we'll figure it out together. Learn how to be human again." Alina appeared at the edge of the beach, Tommy beside her, both of them looking like survivors of a war they'd never asked to fight. Elena's laptop bag was slung over her shoulder, containing the stories that would expose Victor's network and free the women and children who'd been trapped in its web. "The authorities are asking questions," Elena said. "We should probably not be here when they start getting serious about finding answers." Sarah stood, feeling the weight of her wounded shoulder and the deeper ache of choices that couldn't be unmade. Behind them lay the wreckage of Pier 9 and everything she'd been forced to become. Ahead waited uncertainty and the terrifying possibility of redemption. "Where do we go?" Tommy asked. Sarah looked at her brother, at Elena, at Marcus. Three people who'd risked everything to save her, who'd chosen to stand with her when she'd finally stopped running from who she really was. "Anywhere but here," she said. "Somewhere we can be whoever we choose to become." They walked up the beach together as the sun climbed higher over Vancouver, for people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to face the light together. Behind them, the harbor burned with the ghosts of their former lives. Ahead lay the uncertain promise of freedom and the terrifying possibility that love might, just might, be stronger than the darkness they'd all survived. Sarah Chen was supposed to be dead, but she'd never felt more alive. And for the first time since that warehouse explosion 3 years ago, she was ready to stop running and start living. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The end. Like this video if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love, and let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.